We'll get into the college football playoff final with Richard Karn of Home Improvement a little bit later in the show, but I do want to chew on an interesting facet of all that's going into tonight, which is pretty solidly, I think, the nation's going to rally behind Michael Penix and the Washington Huskies today because for several reasons that have happened this season, the spying allegations and the fact that generally people like an underdog, Michigan's not super likable. And I think we're going to see an overwhelming amount of support online anyways for Washington.
Greg Cody has said that we are all Huskies now. That Greg Cody, who doesn't really have an emotional interest in any of this, I believe a lot of Americans, if you're tangentially interested in sports, you will find the Washington story more palatable than the Michigan one.
But also more motivated by hate and disdain for what Michigan's allegedly done this season. And I want to seize on that because Michigan has been motivated by hate, I think, to get to this point. They were trounced by Ohio State for several years. Urban Meyer famously never lost to Michigan, and they're finally there. There's a team that had a split national championship in 1997, but for much of the new century hasn't mattered the way that they've mattered over these last few years. And the Jim Harbaugh era over there didn't get off to the easiest start. There was questions as to whether or not he could survive at Michigan. And I find that interesting about college football, in that with very few exceptions, you have these dominant teams. Alabama, you had Florida have its run, Ohio State have its run. The bitter rivals of these programs do whatever they can to get to that level. Not so much because it's a goal of theirs, that's everybody's goal, but mainly to prevent the other team from doing it because it's driving them crazy. Alabama, you had Auburn get up there, and they kind of sold their soul for it and got in trouble retroactively. Gene Chizik's not really hireable as a head coach anymore. LSU also, to a degree, fierce rival with Alabama. They got themselves in it, and inevitably you heard things afterwards, and there was stuff there. Michigan follows that profile. Texas saw Oklahoma do it. Texas in the BCS era does it. Honestly, it makes me really think poorly of what Miami's done and what UCLA's done because they've had their rivals have success. FSU saw what Florida was doing, desperate to chase them. Georgia saw what Florida was doing, desperate to chase them. And always, with very few exceptions, you can pick apart ways that they got to the mountain that were kind of shady, even by college football standards. And this year, it's no different.
If you have to be dirtier than Urban Meyer in order to win against Florida
That's
or
dirty.
Ohio State, you got to get really dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a scenario here where, and they'll always have tonight, regardless of what happens to this, and I'm not suggesting that they'll wipe away this national championship, but no matter what comes out in the press, no matter what asterisk people want to put onto this title in phony social media world that's not a real place, they're going to potentially get away with it. They're favored to get away with this whole thing tonight, and
No, Mike,
that's fascinating.
Mike, it's not. They've already gotten away with it. If there are no consequences while it's happening,
Right. They've gotten away with it.
unless something
There were
happens.
consequences, like Harbaugh was suspended.
No. I'm talking about consequences that cost you, not consequences.
They're playing
that
for a
look
title
back,
tonight.
Look bad. I'm
Right.
talking about unless we were. You guys will remember that before the Michigan-Ohio State game, there were emergency injunctions being filed for Harbaugh to try and law his way onto the sideline by making judges make ruling after hours for judges. Like if you'd call in a search warrant on a Saturday morning because the judge needs to be woken up so that Harbaugh can coach. The idea that Michigan is playing this game and gets this game with a coach who's missed half their games for malfeasance that's hard to prove is them getting away with it already. There is nothing that will stand in the way between them getting tonight as a night, even if they lose, as a night, they get it over every possible infraction that they have that will not matter.
Are both you guys saying if it's vacated 10 years from now?
They're never going to be able to take away this night. It's this night will ring eternal, but it also doesn't often work out. Blake Corum had NFL prospects. Jim Harbaugh tried his damnedest to have NFL prospects. You don't often see considering the beatdown that they suffered. Well, it ended up being close, but they lost to TCU. An embarrassing loss considering how the national championship game went for TCU, where key essential figures come back. We got to get this. Let's run it back. We'll bring everybody back to school. More often than not, it turns out the way that Peyton Manning turned out in 1997. But it doesn't work out where you can actually correct the wrongs of the previous year. And they have an opportunity to do that. And in many respects, it seems like the end of an era, the start of an era potentially for Michigan, but also the end because you'd favor Jim Harbaugh to be going to the NFL. He's been trying for years.
Who's rooting for Michigan tonight outside of Michigan?
Outside of gamblers? I haven't seen anyone. Like, look at these two teams based on the stories and their paths to get there that has rationally made the choice. Yeah, I know they have the Connor Stallions thing, but I really like this Michigan team.
I have not understood all season, and Jessica, please help me here, because the point spreads in the Washington games, to me, have been confusing to me because I don't have the – what are you laughing about?
They're always underdogs.
But they're underdogs in this game, and when I watch them play – their style is so big and fun that I can make the argument that Michigan's going to be too strong for them along the front. But I don't know why Washington would be an underdog against anybody. Because the team that I have watched this season, their quarterback can make big plays against anybody easily. At one point this season, 25% of the throws he was making were deep throws. Like, that's how he got into the Heisman conversation. And I don't have a sophisticated enough eye for what is happening along the line. What I fear tonight is that Michigan will just hold on to the ball, that Michigan will keep the ball away from Washington. But I was confused I would have thought that the spread in this game would be 3, not 4.5. But against Oregon, after beating Oregon, Washington was a 10-point underdog. And I'm just confused by the way this team is viewed. And because the gambling money tends to be smart. It tends to be right in these instances. And if they're questioning Washington's line play, I would defer to the money on that.
Well, I think what the line play that maybe you'd be concerned about would be the defense, because the offensive line has been very good at Washington. But the defense, according to S&P Plus, is ranked somewhere in the 40s or 30s right now. I don't know off the top of my head, but whereas Michigan's had a top 10 unit on both sides of the ball throughout most of the season, right? So what you're looking at is a team that their offense keeps them in every single game, because Michael Penix, although it hasn't looked easy in every game, and they have a very tough schedule, he can just throw the most accurate, beautiful long ball to one of his 3 outstanding receivers that you've ever seen, and then that's 6 points right there. So he keeps them, and their offense keeps them in every single game, even if their defense isn't a top 10 unit in the country. Although I will say their defense has, I think, proven people wrong, especially against Texas last week. They kept them right there.
They had a Heisman runner-up, I believe, right? Penix finished second?
Second.
Yes.
Heisman runner-up. They're in the college football playoff final, and I think most people, even people that follow the sport, don't know their head coach's name. They've done this kind of in the shadows. They've quietly gotten to a college football playoff.
But how?
I think it's regional bias. I really do.
Really?
Yeah, they're not featured enough nationally. They don't have the national game. They've had game day go there enough, but I don't.
But they
I
had
don't know
one
what
last
it is.
week.
But
They had one last week against Texas. They had one 2 weeks. 2 weeks
the
before that
Oregon
against
game.
Oregon.
Washington's
Right.
made
The
it.
first Oregon
This is
game.
the
Right.
second time Washington's made it to the college football playoff. I think they made it to the very first batch, and it was a different head coach, Chris Peterson. But they tend to have success there very quietly.
The point spread is because the thought is that Michigan along the offensive line is too strong for where Washington is weak along the defensive line.
Which would allow them to control the game and keep the ball away from
That's the
Penix.
reason for the line.
Yeah, I think it's going to play out. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we'll get to see Michael Penix chasing this game as Michigan tries to keep away from him. But to me, if they could do that on the lines against Alabama, they're not going to have an issue doing that against Washington, and Washington's going to have to find a different way to win this game. I mean, they're going to have to play their game, but will they have enough chances? It's a higher risk game that they're playing.
But Washington did it against Texas, who did it against Alabama.
Oh.
Huh?
Who did it against
Transitive
Georgia.
doing it against Bama.
So
Ooh.
I guess they've done it against Georgia, right?
Well, this is amazing because he's assigning a transitive property to Washington, even though we just saw Michigan do it against Bama.
That is correct.
Tricky
Who
game.
did it against Georgia too? They both done it against Georgia.